Plato was born in Athens in 42 BCE and died in 347 BCE. We know little about his personal life, apart from his philosophy. Even though we don't know much about Plato, it is important, especially to understand the Republic, to know a little about the social and political context in which he lived. Athens, at the time, was a radical, participatory democracy, and this had an important influence on the origin of philosophy. In one sense, you could argue that without democracy, there would have been no philosophy. Yet it is also important to realize that the Republic is a profoundly anti-democratic text. Unlike democracies in our age, Athens was a participatory democracy. Citizens, who were defined as male, were expected to fully contribute to the running of the city. You do not vote for someone to represent you, rather you took an active part in the decisions of the city. The basic form of this democracy was taking lots, like our jury system. Thus, both the executive and the judiciary were chosen by lot, and all the eligible citizens were supposed to attend the assembly to vote on the laws. Plato's criticisms of Athenian democracy is that it led to disorder and conflict. The aim of the Republic is to argue for a different kind of politics, one that was based on authority and excellence, and whose goal was order and unity. It is worth remembering that Plato's metaphysics, not a word he would have used, is for the sake of this political vision, and his theory of forms, again not an expression he would have used, is also for the sake of a political revolution. Where does the Republic fit within Plato's other dialogues? Unlike his first dialogues like the Apology or the Critio, the Republic isn't merely concerned with presenting the authentic figure of his teacher, Socrates, who we should remember Athens put to death, which is another reason for Plato's mistrust of democracy. The Republic also contains Plato's own thoughts. Unlike the later dialogues, like the Laws, for example, Socrates still comes across as a dramatic persona. The Republic, then, is like the other middle dialogues, like the Symposium. The major theme of the Republic is justice. For Plato, there is an analogy between the just person and the just city. Each is a whole that is made of parts. The just city is made up of three distinct classes, though these classes are not classes in the modern sense: the guardians, the warriors, and the artisans. The just city is the one in which each of these parts works in harmony, and they do so because each part knows its rightful place and function. The just person or soul is also made of different parts that must work in harmony. The question of the Republic is which is the part that should govern the whole. In the just person, it is the rational part of the soul. So, in the analogy between the just person and the just city, which part is like the rational part of the soul? The answer, of course, is the guardians. The majority of the Republic is about how these guardians should be educated so as to have the best interests of the city in mind, which would be justice. Plato argues that these guardians should be trained as philosophers. It's in terms of this issue that we have to understand Plato's famous simile of the cave. What makes a philosopher is what they know, or at least what they aim to know. What is the specific knowledge of the philosophers? It is the forms or ideas, and especially the idea of the good. The problem for us as readers of the Republic is that as soon as we would expect Plato to define what an idea is, or the idea of the good, he tells us a story or a myth. We might wonder why he does that. Perhaps he thought that you could not really learn philosophy from a book, and in reading what we called the theory of forms, we would mistakenly think that we understood it. Or perhaps, as Haddo suggests, philosophy for Plato was a way of life, and you would never be able to understand it from reading books anyway. Be that as it may, this leaves us with an interpretive puzzle that we have to answer for ourselves, since Plato is dead. First of all, the simile of the cave is in a series of illustrations of the idea of the good. So first of all, we must start there. The first story is about the good. If philosophers are to rule the city, then they must have the highest kind of knowledge. But what is the highest level of knowledge? It is knowledge of the good. To explain the idea of the good, Socrates uses the analogy of sight. To see something, we do not just need our eyes, but the light that comes from the sun. The idea of the good is like the sun because it allows us to see things as they really are, fully illuminated. Like the sun, the good is also the origin of all things that we see. For just like the sun, nothing would exist without the idea of the good. If we only see with our senses, then we don't see things as they really are. We have to see them with our minds that can grasp the rational order of the universe. The next analogy that Socrates uses explains this division between the sensible and the intelligible, and it is called the divided line. The divided line is separated into two unequal parts, and then these two parts are further divided. So we have two sensible orders at the bottom and two intelligible orders at the top. The lowest level of the sensible order are shadows and images. The next level is perception. We then pass into the intelligible order. The first level of the intelligible order is the knowledge of the sciences, like physics and mathematics. Finally, we reach the highest level, which is philosophy. To each of these different levels, there corresponds a different kind of knowledge. The lowest level, which is not really knowledge at all for Plato, is illusion. Then there is belief. The first real knowledge is reasoning, and the highest knowledge is philosophical understanding. The Greek word that Plato uses for the last kind of knowledge is gnosis. All this serves as a background to the allegory or simile of the cave, which is perhaps the most famous of Plato's stories or myths. We are to imagine a deep subterranean cave in which there are prisoners chained to a wall and who can only see forward. All they can see are the images, thrown by the figures that men are carrying on a raised causeway behind them. What they see is what they imagine reality to be. One day, one of them breaks free of his chains. He sees that the images are not real, and he crawls out of the cave into the daylight world. At first he cannot see because he is blinded by the light, but as he becomes accustomed to the light, he sees what the real world truly is. Eventually, he can raise his head to look into the heavens and see the true origin of the light and the world around him, which is the sun. Rather than staying in this world, he decides to return to the cave and tell his friends what the truth is. They do not believe him. They laugh and jeer at him and become more and more angry as he insists that their world is not the true world. Unable to bear this truth, they murder him. They would rather live as prisoners than face the arduous and terrible truth. The simile of the cave is a retelling of Socrates' fate. For he too was put to death by the Athenians because of his beliefs. It puts a psychological intensity to being a philosopher that is absent in the other stories. The man has to break free of his chains. The journey is arduous and difficult. He is, first of all, blinded by the light, and he has to decide whether to return to his fellow prisoners. His fate also explains why Plato's ideal city only existed in words.